Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here from the Snowdon Deli. I'm Aaron Rand from CJAD along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette, joined today by John Parisella, a name that may be familiar to many of you, involved in provincial politics for many, many years, Delegate General for Quebec to the United States for a while as well. And today, that's what we're going to talk about. So, John, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Aaron.
Before we begin, I'd like to present you with your shirt. Canada is not for sale.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and then I thought in really Canadian fashion, but thank you for asking was the right way to say it. So there you go. That's yours.
We're in crowd. Watch this.
There you go.
Is that great?
So let's start with that. I want to switch it around. We're going to talk tariffs, but I think we have to acknowledge we had the Prime Minister just the other day caught on a hot mic saying this idea of Donald Trump's Canada as the 51st state is no longer a joke, and we have to start taking this seriously because he believes there's some actual interest there because of Canada's critical minerals, et cetera. My question is, it's okay for all of us to realize it's not a joke anymore, but if it's serious, what do we do?
Well, I think we're doing the right things right now. The announcement that Trump made that to the effect that he was going to impose 25% tariffs, we needed to retaliate, and we had a good program in two phases. One that would hit products that are more consumer oriented, and then something larger would come in a little bit later. And the reaction, I think, was very positive because it united the Council of Federation, all the premiers. They're all together, and the Prime Minister, he's not going to be Prime Minister after the 9th of March. It's probably one of the best exits you can probably want to have. A very strong speech, and just a few days ago, he was in a meeting with the business leaders across the country to talk about it. Where he made the off-the-mic comment about Trump not really joking about the first state. So I think we're reacting in the right way, and I think the comment he made was more in line with the fact that this is not over.
Right.
This is in a month's time. There's going to be probably another demand.
Right.
I think the ultimate goal that Trump has is to negotiate or renegotiate the free trade agreement that he signed on in 2020. Not to start the next phase or the negotiation in a year from now or around the beginning of the summer of 2026. He wants to do it now because they're midterms. A year from now, all the talk will be how the midterm is going to go. And in the summer of 2026, during the heat of an election in the fall, of course, we'll see whether the midterms Trump is able to hold on. In the midterms, in his first term, he did lose.
Right.
He did lose control of one of the houses. And so I think Trump realizes this is his last term, according to the Constitution, and therefore he wants to...
As if that matters. The Constitution.
The American Constitution and the American democracy is much bigger than one person. We had Trump. We went through Trump once. America existed before Trump. America will exist after Trump.
Right.
And American democracy is not something that's just happened. It's the most stable democracy in the history of mankind. So I'm not worried about democracy going away in the United States. What I am worried about is that he's doing things to try to put us on the defensive. It's not a military overture that he's making, although people like to imply that could happen, but it's an economic aggression.
But people are dreaming if they think that this business with the tariffs at 25%, we've had a month reprieve. If they think that's going to be the end of it, he will come after us for more stuff all the time. And the ultimate goal in the minds of many is that basically he wants what we have most, which is minerals. We have water, we have hydroelectric power, and all the rest. That is his ultimate goal, whether that means he tries to take control of the country or do something. I'm told, by the way, that water, it's in our Quebec. You can't sell our water, apparently.
Well, irrespective of what he wants to do, it's clear that what he wants to do, he says in one phrase, Canada should be annexed or become a 51st state.
Right.
Then he said, we don't need Canada, and we're subsidizing Canada at 200 billion a year. So he makes up things that don't pass the test of facts and truth. And then he talks about the fact that that Canada will ultimately lose out the whole deal. But that's not true, because tariffs hit both ways. And ultimately, tariffs are paid a large portion by the consumer. So even the economists, the most expert economists in the world, tell you that, and they do a protraction, or at least a projection of what would happen if there was 25% on our end and 25% on their end. Our economy would enter into recession, but so would the American economy enter into recession. So this is not a win-win. This is a
Well, look at the Wall Street Journal.
lose-lose.
Wall Street Journal came out and said, pretty right wing.
And the amazing thing is that when the
What did they say? It was the stupidest.
the dumbest trade war in history.
Yes.
And the day that he actually pulled back on Canada, he was doing a press conference, signing executive orders
With their Sharpie.
and Rupert Murdoch was in the room.
Right.
And he talked about Rupert Murdoch to the journalists. And about 2 hours or 3 hours later, he had a phone call with Trudeau. And the last thing you know, a little bit later, we were given a reprieve of one month. So this is not a situation that's got a real designed plan of action. This is a lot of Trump improvisation, but it is to be taken seriously. And if there's any message I got from the Trudeau off the mic statement, was that don't think it's just true. It's just Trump playing, for the camera. This is serious. And the 2% contribution of Canada to the NATO budget, that also is on the table. Renegotiating the free trade agreement earlier than predicted is on the table. And he wants to have certain guarantees regarding access to the critical minerals.
Would it be fair to say then, John, as you kind of go through this, that the idea of the border and fentanyl was more than anything else just a distraction to be able to move on to what he really wants?
Well, it's a good point that you're raising there. And I would say not quite, because Mexico's a part of that. And Mexico made, from what I can see and what experts seem to say, made a gesture that was well received by experts in the field of border security and the control of the access of fentanyl. But, like it or not, he wanted to keep both of those Canada and the United States on the same page with the tactic of the tariffs. So in some ways, he made probably a more important gain with Mexico, and he made a gain with Canada as well. But for us, it didn't cost us much because most of the people were there. What he actually did for Canada is he united us more than I've seen. I mean, I was involved, and you mentioned, Aaron, in your intro, I did Quebec politics. I was involved in 3 referendum in the war room of the 1980 referendum, the 1992 on Charlottetown, and the 1995. So I was in the heart of it. And I'll tell you, he's done more to unite this country with what he's done lately than those 3 referenda did.
As someone pointed out in a social network meme, imagine how serious this is uniting Canada. Even Quebec is on board with the rest of the country.
In fact, Quebec is even more Canada proud than other provinces.
By the way, to that point, I'm not sure if I heard this right. It seemed to me that François Legault actually last week talked about reopening NAFTA, something that obviously Donald Trump wants to have done sooner than later. So Quebec's kind of stepped out in front. I don't know where the federal government falls on this, or provincial premiers do, but Quebec, first time we've heard this.
Well, yes, and I think probably the rest of the country would be open to it, but we're going through a transitional period. We're having a new prime minister on the 9th of March. There's a leadership. There are polls that indicated about a week ago that the Tories was going to be an easy victory. Now it looks like it could be a lot tighter. So we're probably going to have a general election between the end of March and sometime perhaps in the spring. I don't think it's going to make it to the winter. To the fall. So we're going to have an election in Canada. We're going to have we're in
pendulum has swung there too. Liberals have picked up with
the Liberals have picked
Carney.
Carney's going well, but whoever is chosen, it's clear that the Liberals have had a good 2-3 weeks with the way they reacted, the way they managed it, and the premiers have been really on the same page. I mean, even if Danielle Smith was protecting Alberta interests, just like in the past, Quebec premiers have protected Quebec interests. She was on side for the reaction, and the country as a whole seems to be behind the approach of unity and consensus.
Do you buy into the theory that you just mentioned we have an election at some point coming up, that Canada suffers, we're in limbo right now by virtue of proroguing Parliament, that because we don't have a unified Parliament right now, there's no one sitting around except for the Liberals dictating policy, that hurts Canada or not?
Well, there's things you can do without Parliament. There are certain things you can do by decree. I think the announcement that was made by Trudeau a few days ago was able to be done without Parliament. Will we be able to conduct this whole thing without Parliament reconvening? That remains to be seen. But
should Parliament come back? I mean, is it important that Parliament reconvene?
Well, I mean, to me, it's a decision that that could go either way. I mean, it's important to get everybody, input in the picture. Mr. Blanchette from the Bloc has been doing press conferences. So has Mr. Polyev and Mr. Singh. Is it better to do it in the House? Nobody wants to have a motion where the majority, which happens to be the opposition parties, create a situation where you go into an election right away. So I think strategically speaking, there's nothing that's going to be done that can't pass the test of legality and the test of parliamentary assessment. You can't impose things that Parliament constitutionally can impose. So I don't think there's a rush to there's an emergency. Let's get the question settled. Who's going to replace Mr. Trudeau? And then the new Prime Minister has got an opportunity. Technically speaking, the prorogation ends on the 24th of March. And we can engage in policy as we are engaging in the last month with the transition in a way that we can be very effective. And I think right now getting involved in Parliament may be a bit premature when the outgoing Prime Minister is not yet.
Okay. The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowdon Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the hub of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus Carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowdon Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowdon Delicatessen.
Well, working in Canada's favor is the fact that Greenland's breathing a sigh of relief now with the news about him wanting to take over Gaza and turning it into a Riviera. I mean, all these things, throwing mud at trees like all over the place and then hoping something sticks somewhere. And I like talk about tariffs to like Japan, the UK, Europe, and all the rest. I mean, this guy's all over the place.
Well, I think you painted the right picture. I think what's happening in the United States right now is a lot of us, we look at what Trudeau or what Trump said about the 51st state. But I spend more time watching American TV.
Right.
And I watch Fox News and I watch MSNBC, CNN, read the Wall Street Journal, read Washington Post, New York Times. And essentially, he has really, really brought in a lot of decrees or executive orders. And the presence of Elon Musk is starting to create problems. There's lawsuits. He's losing suits in the House.
You're running roughshod.
It's not.
Can I just say, with respect to that, this dawned on me yesterday, because you're right, yet another judge has overturned these massive firings. But then I thought, he signs an executive order, it immediately goes into effect, it buys him 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. By the time it gets to court, and by then, 10,000 people have already decided, okay, I'm going to take the offer or leave their jobs. You kind of win that way, even if in a court says stop for now. Those people have all accepted offers and walked away. I think I read the number was 65,000.
Yes, but I also heard that more people would have retired than taken those buyouts at the same time.
I think the fine print doesn't come across when these have these large announcements. I think the very fact that he does these executive orders, that there are numbers of lawsuits that are expanding, and some judges were actually named by them, and they are resisting. So it says that the checks and balances system It's being put to a test, but it's not disappearing.
Well, Musk's minions there have been challenged that they can't run roughshod through, like going into the Treasury doing what they're doing, 19-year-olds and all the rest. But I think what ultimately might get him is, did you see the Time cover with Elon sitting behind like in the Oval Office and behind the desk? And I think ultimately that's going to, I mean, he's a very jealous man, a very petty man on a certain level.
Narcissism is, his major quality or a fault. I think this is a matter of time. But it is serious. I mean, Americans have to look at we're looking at our economic situation. They have to look at the state of the democracy. And let's be honest, in the last campaign, all of the stuff he's doing, he pretty well said he would do. Retribution. But there are things that are going to work against the United States and against our allies, and the leadership. We're no longer in 1910 or 1860, 1870. We're in 2025. American leadership remains very important. He's putting it at risk, especially this decision about U.S. aid. U.S. aid is not just charity. U.S. aid is very strategic.
Sure.
It's to establish links in countries that very often, had America had not been there, America would be under siege from different parts of the world. And we have China that's becoming the certainly, if there's two powers in the world, one is the United States, the other is China. And of course, there's a war in Europe with Ukraine, and there's also elections in some of the most important allied countries. So this is not an easy time, and I think we have to be just careful. The most important thing in governing is not to panic, but to have a plan to react and to know where you want to go. I think it's an opportunity for Canada, Quebec and Canada as well, to do things to our economy that make us less dependent.
Sure.
It won't happen overnight.
Which is what I want to follow up with. I don't want to give Trump too much credit, but unintentionally, he basically has galvanized Canadian reaction and response. My question is, it's all well and good to say, okay, now we're aware that we're dealing with someone who we don't really know a whole lot about in terms of how he's going to act. So yes, interprovincial trade, something that apparently is so easy to do in this country, but no one has sought to do in the past, to have free trade just simply within our own provinces. But how easy is it, or how quickly can you do that with European allies, for example? Like, we could be selling to Europe. No, you can't drive a truck across, but you can say, you know what, we should have a relationship with the European Union. Can we put that together, and can that happen fairly quickly, do you think?
Fairly quickly, it may be a bit premature to say that, but the early part of your question, the answer is yes. Canada is the only country that's got a free trade agreement with every country in the G7. Canada's got a Trans-Pacific free trade agreement, which the United States is not part of. And we have one with the European Union, which is the United States are not part of. Now, France is the last country to endorse the European Union. So we've got access to important markets, but I think we talk about interprovincial trade, but they talked about it when I started politics back in the 1980s. Not much has been done, and yet they are more of an impact on the equivalent of interprovincial trade. If we were to put it in terms of tariffs, is much greater than whatever exists between Canada and the United States. So yes, we got to get our act together.
Yeah, but
diversity of partners, trade partners, interprovincial barriers. We have to tackle them and bring them down or eliminate them, and we have to keep in mind that we have critical minerals that are extremely important. One thing that people forget is, according to the Canadian Constitution, natural resources is the responsibility of the provinces.
Right.
And trade is a shared responsibility. Like immigration is a shared responsibility. So that is why, Trump doesn't really know our system. So in some ways, what he has done is he's made us work together as I have never seen it in a long time.
Well, what's interesting is now Legault is talking about allowing perhaps a pipeline to bring gas and oil from out west. They were strictly against this at a certain point in time. Now they're talking about that. Now they're talking about, as you pointed out, it's easier to trade with like France or Great Britain than it is with Alberta if you're in Quebec or whatever, which is, Aaron's point, is ridiculous. That there's a pathway here too.
Well, I think so, and to use a common expression, we took probably the lazy way out. If we could deal with the United States, we're friends. The majority of our population lives closer to an American state than we live to each other.
Right.
And it's a lot easier for me to go to New York than to go to Vancouver in terms of time and transportation and whatever. So I think this is it's working out as an opportunity. The question is, will our politicians want to take this opportunity? My sense right now, I'm looking at the campaign in Ontario. To be fair, I think Doug Ford, who's the Premier of Ontario and the head of the Council of the Federation, is doing a relatively good job. The only thing I would criticize about him is when he said about 3 weeks ago or a month ago that we could do a deal between Canada and the United States and not Mexico. That's wrong. I think it's important. Mexico is part of it. And I think if there's one thing that I sort of missed today is the fact that Brian Mulroney is not around. Because Brian Mulroney was the guy who did the deal with the United States, and he's the guy who added Mexico in the whole deal. And it's been a relatively good deal, not only for Mexico and Canada, but also for the United States. So Trump is playing his own game, his own strategy, but he doesn't have. He won the election, but he didn't win the landslide that he keeps telling everybody. He got 49.8%, I think it was, of the popular vote, and Miss Kamala Harris got, I think, 48.3%.
Half of America did not vote for Donald Trump.
That's my point.
But you got to look at what happened in Gaza.
Right.
A lot of to lose Dearborn. The Democrats lost Dearborn in Michigan.
Right.
Had a lot to do with what was going on
Absolutely.
in the Middle East. So these are things. It was a close victory, but he did win it. I won't deny that. And he's got right now a majority of one seat in the House. He'll probably have 3 or 4 once those who have been named to jobs replaced through by-elections. But still a very tight race. So he could very well lose the midterms, and that's why he's thinking of getting achievements in areas like free trade, defense,
right.
Changing.
But my question is, you were just down in the States. Yeah. You talk about half of the population didn't vote for him, and yet the only noise we hear coming is from his side. What's going on with the other side? You don't hear any dissent, really. Like everybody's sucking up on a certain level to him. Certainly,
where are the Democrats?
Where are the Democrats? And you were down there.
I think you have to be fair. There's always a honeymoon period. The first one in 100 days.
It's been a usually nightmare.
Pardon me?
It's been a nightmare.
Yeah, for us. But for a lot of people who supported him, they're saying he's doing what he said he was going to do. And for those who oppose him, they're worried. And yes, the Democrats don't have the leadership right now. But then again, in 2004, they lost a tight election. And people said, boy, they're really in trouble. 2008, Barack Obama won. And 2012, he won again.
Yeah.
And over 50% of the vote. So in America, you have to always be careful. Checks and balances system works. The Democrats are going to get their act together. In some cases, they are mobilizing people. And as Bernie Sanders wrote too recently, if you're going to oppose Donald Trump or oppose the government that you don't like, it's not going to come from the top down. It's going to come from the bottom up. And I watch Canadian media. All I'm hearing about is Trump, tariffs, and the 51st state. I go to the United States. It's a little item.
Yeah, right.
It's a little item. And Americans, there's 9 million jobs depending on the relationship between Canada. So we have a lot more proximity. When John F. Kennedy came to Parliament and said we are neighbors, we are friends, we are partners, and we are allies, that defined the relationship. Now, is it the same thing with Trump? The short answer is no. Is the trust level with Trump just something that's going to get back together? I don't think so. But the relationship between Canada and the United States is still there among the citizens, with the country, and we have too much in common to really break up. But having said that, we can't stay indifferent and say, well, we'll wait for 4 years when Trump disappears. No, and I think we acted well. And I think we're acting well again. And I think Trudeau's off-the-mic statement had a lot more to do with don't let your guard down. This is serious. And if it isn't military invasion, it's an economic invasion.
But there's another factor. The guy's a bully. And I mean, whatever economic sense we're talking about, or social sense, or anything else, ultimately he sees a guy like Justin Trudeau as a guy he can push around, who he thinks he can push around, and he relishes the prospect of like other autocrats who are able to push around people. I think he loves this thing.
Yeah, but you see, in the first term, he said, "I'm getting out of NATO, not NATO, excuse me, the NAFTA."
Right.
And he said in 2017, in 2020 we had a deal. 2018, he goes on his Twitter site, and he says Trudeau's a traitor, and Trudeau's weak. And this was after they had the G7 meeting in Charlemont. 2 years later, he signs the deal with Trudeau. So I think we have to be very
And
careful.
calls it the greatest trade deal in America.
And he calls it the greatest trade deal.
Right.
You know, so with Trump, you have to you have to be careful, yes, and you have to take him seriously, yes, but you know he's not a strategic thinker. He's he's transactional, and if you read The Art of the Deal, he's very transactional, and he's unpredictable
And vindictive.
And that is why Trudeau, I think, again said that off the mic thing, is that this is not going to end easily and necessarily well. But you know, in the past, Bill, I followed Canada-U.S. Politics for the last since the '60s when I was a student, and we've had presidents and prime ministers who didn't like each other. Diefenbaker and Kennedy didn't like each other. LBJ and Pearson had a fallout over Vietnam. Trudeau and Nixon didn't like each other. But Carter and Trudeau, they got along. Reagan got along with Mulroney. So we have had moments where prime ministers and presidents don't get along. This guy is different. He's not in traditional politics. And we have what I often say to illustrate my point, I get up my telephone, we're living in an era of social media, which we didn't have in the past.
But even if those relationships weren't good, they understood the importance of Canada, America, and that's what I worry that in this case he doesn't sort of see that importance.
Yeah, or you could look at it and say it's all bluster, because at the end of the day, as you said, there are 9 million jobs relying on the agreement that's in place already.
He's not seeing
You can't afford to lose 9 million jobs or have 9 million people vote against you.
But so far, that reality is not so.
Not yet.
Well,
no.
But he'll never admit it to you anyway. You know?
Right.
He had the same attitude before the free trade agreement that he signed in 2020 when he said he was going to get out. He ended up staying in and said it was the greatest deal. So I think we have to. I keep telling everybody, take him seriously, but don't take him necessarily at his word, and have a plan. Don't just be reactive, be proactive. And our proactivity now has got to be on dealing with interprovincial barriers. It's got to deal with diversity of economic partners. We have 50 partners, economic partners that we deal with in the world, and we have 75% of our exports that go to the United States. But 36 states out of 50, the number one destination for trade is Canada. And for 48 states, Canada is in the top 3. So, like it or not, they need Canada, but it's not necessarily. Obviously, if we go into a war, and that kind of a commercial war with the United States, we're up against a heavyweight. But we're not out of the ring. We're not in the center of the ring, but we're in the ring.
Yeah, we could bob and weave and find our way through this. So,
You know, and
look,
Will Elon ever come around? No. Must. I mean,
Elon,
that's where he gets his.
I think we need to find out a little bit more about the person, the personality, and so I'm not going to make any predictions on what's going to happen with Elon Musk. All I know is that he's the flavor of the day with Trump, and as I just mentioned, flavor of the day. The day can change.
we have to wrap up. I want to ask you one last thing, just very quickly. Having talked about all this and sort of laid everything out, is it fair to say, John, that you're optimistic that we find our way through this?
Yeah, I think, Aaron, I consider myself an optimist. I'm not trying to spin something. I'll give you just a couple of examples. Americans, for example, use about 20 million barrels of oil a day, and they only produce 13. So they got to get the other 7 million elsewhere. We provide 4 of the 7 million. So we're part of the thing, and that's why when you mentioned earlier, we're now open to maybe pipelines. But we need to have that debate again. There was no social acceptability of pipelines 5 years ago. the situation has changed. So let us have that discussion. Let us have that debate. Aluminum. 90% of primary aluminum is made in Canada. We are suppliers of over 75 to 80% of the aluminum that the Americans need. We do that.
Lumber too.
And lumber, they meet about 70% of their needs, but the other 30% has got to come from
After
elsewhere.
the LA fires, more so than ever.
So I think we've got assets, and the one thing we I think weren't very notable or noticed about was our resolve and our respect for our sovereignty. I've never met so many Canadians telling me how proud they are Canadian and saying, I'm not going to the States this summer. I'm not going to buy this. I'm not going to Starbucks tomorrow because it's in America. I mean, it's something that I never heard about.
And we're going to
Let's not forget hydroelectric power. When the Trump Tower in New York
Goes
goes
dark,
dark, I think then it might sink.
We have a very diversified economy and a productive economy with the lowest unemployment rate right now in Canada is in Quebec, 5.4%.
John Parisella, I want to thank you for your time today.
Well, I
We
want to
appreciate it.
congratulate you for the work you do, and I thank you very much for having me. It's an honor for being. I know you two guys from another world, and I'm with the tops.
We appreciate it.
We appreciate
Merci
that.
beaucoup.
That wraps up another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast. We'll see you again soon.